Hi everyone, welcome. While we wait another minute for everyone to join, please share in the chat where are you joining us from today? And also, which thematic area of the Call for Solutions 2026 are you most excited about this year? Please feel free to share in the chat. We're looking forward to seeing your answers. We see Namibia, Kenya, Fiji, Botswana, Uruguay, Olá, Italy, Zambia, Mozambique, Nigeria, Brazil. Good morning, Brazil. Mexico, US. So many people from so many countries. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. It is our pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Lakshmi, that is Geld Guzman, and together with my co-moderator, Lydia Beyene, we are part of the Youth4Climate team. Welcome to the second session of the Deep Dive webinar series for the Youth4Climate Call for Solutions 2026. Before we begin, just a quick note that you might already have seen in the chat, but we do have interpretation available in this webinar. So this webinar is available in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese for live interpretation, simultaneous interpretation. In addition, live captions are also available in the Zoom in several languages, which you can access through the captions option at the bottom of your screen. My colleagues are already sharing instructions in the chat so that you can select your preferred language or captions. So let's walk through the agenda today. We have a very exciting webinar. In this webinar, we will focus on the new thematic areas and reintroduce one as well of the Youth4Climate Call for Solutions 2026, which was already launched on March 2nd, as you know. And we are joined by colleagues from UNDP who will guide us through them. In the first part of the webinar, we will explore architecture for adaptation. And in this first of architecture for adaptation with our colleagues Omar Zemrag, climate change technical specialist at UNDP's Climate Hub, BPPS, who will explore how cities and the built environment play a critical role in climate adaptation, particularly in the context of urban resilience and national climate strategies such as NDCs. And then we will hear from Samar Taha, technical specialist on climate change adaptation for the Asia Pacific region at UNDP, who will present practical approaches to climate adaptive architecture and design, including how buildings and construction practices can respond to climate risks such as heat, flooding, drought, and storms. After that, we will move to sustainable fashion and textiles, where Alana Cragen, Global Climate Policy Coordinator for the Climate Strategies at Policy and Policy Team at UNDP, will explore how innovation in the fashion sector can support more sustainable production models, circular approaches, and inclusive value chains. We will then have Q&A sessions where you will have the opportunity to ask questions related to the thematic areas presented today. Just a quick note, if you have any questions related to the application process of the Call for Solutions, eligibility criteria, or evaluation, those topics were already covered in the first deep dive webinar. And you can also find more information in the Call for Solution guidelines and FAQ document on the Youth4Climate platform. My colleagues will also share some of those links in the chat. So we will keep the Q&A very much focused to the thematic areas this time. And in the second half of this webinar, my colleague Lydia will take over moderation. We will first hear from Dr. Madeline Nayara Tutsa. She's Regional Technical Specialist for Water, Ecosystems, and Biodiversity at UNDP Regional Service Center for Africa, who will introduce the thematic area Oceans and Blue Economy, highlighting how youth-led solutions can support ocean health, biodiversity protection, and sustainable livelihood in coastal communities. And finally, we will reintroduce the thematic area of climate, peace, and security with colleagues Sally Swinen, Climate and Security Risk Policy Analyst for UNDP Climate Hub, and Serena Arcone, Capacity Development Specialist on Climate and Security Risks with UNDP Climate Hub. And they will discuss how climate change can interact with conflict dynamics, livelihoods, and governance challenges, and how youth-led solutions can contribute to climate action that strengthens peace and resilience in fragile contexts. And we will also have another Q&A segment after that section. And well, without further ado, we have a very exciting agenda. It is now my pleasure to pass the floor to our colleague, Omar Zemrag. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmin. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, yes, we can see your screen, Omar.
Okay, I'm just gonna say hello and then turn off my camera just to save on the bandwidth. Hello, everyone. My name is Omar Zemrag. I'm a climate change technical specialist with UNDP's Climate Hub and also Climate Promise Africa focal point. Apologies, I have to turn off my camera. I'm based in Rabat, Morocco, and just have to save on the bandwidth. But before I start, I would like to thank the organizers for this deep dive webinar on a very specific issue. And also, I think it's a great pleasure from my end and a great honor to be here today with a very special audience, especially an audience that bears the brunt of climate change, but also represents the hope for all of us, for humanity. Through innovation, through youth energy, but also bold initiatives and bold innovative approaches. So it's really a great pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. Today's presentation, and I apologize beforehand, I will bore you with numbers, but that's why I think I started first before moving into a more interesting presentations from other colleagues on security, on oceans, and fashion and other thematic areas. So today's thematic area, and specifically talking about architecture and climate change, focusing with adaptation. Look at the presentation itself. It sits at the intersection of urgent challenges of our time, rapid urbanization of our planet, especially in developing countries and more specifically in Asia and Africa, where we see huge number of growing number of cities and growing number of urbanization, and the accelerating climate crisis that we all know about and live on every day. We will explore very simple in a simple manner and look at the arguments that the built environments, buildings, streets, infrastructures, and cities that we design and inhabit is both a major driver for climate change, but at the same time sits at as a powerful tool for adapting to climate change, but also mitigating the effects of climate change. So we'll start the presentation with some of the boring numbers. Again, as mentioned previously, the urbanization is increasing. 4.4 billion people that live in cities today, and by 2050, 70% of the global population will be in cities. At the same time, 80% of global GDP in terms of economic production is produced by the urban settings in cities through city dwellers and city population. On the other hand, through that, because of the increased economic production, we see also an increase in about 70% contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and also consuming 75% of global energy. The other reverse of the medal is also that with increased population inside the cities comes increased vulnerability to climate change and impacts. But at the same time, we can look at how cities are central to climate solutions and innovative approaches to tackling climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. Before moving into that, and I would like to talk also about the national strategies and why we need to link to national strategies, specifically the NDCs. Some of you might already be familiar with the what we refer to the climate plans, the national climate plans, and the NDCs. Some are not, but we can, for the sake of simplification, we just refer to as national climate plans. As you probably know, the Paris Agreement requires every country to submit a nationally determined contribution or a national climate plan. That's every 5 years, outlining their mitigation objectives, but also adaptation objectives. And through an analysis of the submitted climate plans, we see that there is an increased interest in urban aspect, but also the city aspects, looking at measures and action that is linked to the called architecture, design of buildings, but we'll not just look at the design, but also energy, how to adapt to flooding, for example, how to reduce the risk of weather hazards, etc. So overall, we have done an analysis with our colleagues at UN Habitat for the recently submitted NDCs, and we see a balance between mitigation and adaptation. Just here that in previous NDCs, there wasn't a balance. There was more mitigation than adaptation, but we're happy to see that adaptation is taking center stage overall, especially for developing countries. Is very important because they don't contribute much to mitigation. But nonetheless, the energy aspect is also important in terms of increasing independence and also moving towards sustainable solutions. We're looking at other numbers in terms of governance, and this touches to not just national governance, but subnational governance as well, which is important in making decisions to what building designs we would move to, the infrastructure, etc. Another aspect is urban climate finance, and very important here, it's the lowest figure. Still, those cities lack the access to existing instruments in climate finance. And overall, we see that very good positive increase towards the inclusion of well-developed urban measures within this national climate plans. And just to give you here a quick overview how that changed from 2020 submissions to 2025 submissions, an increase in mitigation measures, a substantial increase in adaptation measures, about 40 plus 44, and the means of implementation, which we're looking at governance, capacity building, and finance. Now, in terms of the topic of adaptation, we cannot decouple it also from disaster risk reduction and why we need to move into urgent action within cities. The type of hazards that we experience in cities range from extreme heat waves, water scarcity and drought, flooding, infrastructure, which can lead also to service disruptions. And services here, we need to keep in mind hospitals, basic public services that could be disrupted because of this extreme weather events. And also sea level rise and coastal flooding, which I think will be addressed by other colleagues in this during this webinar. So in a conclusion, the urban areas do concentrate exposure to this hazard, and adaptation is critical and a priority in climate policy and planning. Now, just to looking at the built environment and moving into the architecture side, the built environment, just in a nutshell, it's a physical interface between climate hazard and human vulnerability, and an important delivery mechanism. To give you another boring figures, we have seen the number of population that is increasing in urban settings today, but also the projections to 2050. And 2050 just around the corner. We need to plan ahead. And need to look at this implementation in cities, not just for today, but also what will happen in 10, 20, 30 years in the future. From the economic aspect, there is also great impact. I see about around 326 trillion in global built asset value that is at risk. And we need to keep it in mind as well to reduce not only to build adaptive buildings, but also to protect the environment where buildings resides, and overall from the city perspective. The number of population is itself 1 billion people in informal settlements without building regulations. This is also important to take into consideration when linking to national policies and national climate plans. 800 million urban residents in low elevated coastal zones facing sea level rise, especially in cities where the action is becoming extremely urgent. Heat, we have seen in a lot of countries that we reside increased heat effects, and that leads to an increased number of fatality, and especially on older people, but also on infants, and with the impact on the infrastructure, hospital infrastructure as well. So how do we respond? First thing is hazard-specific design. Second is moving towards the policy and climate and building codes that respond to the emerging crisis and the current crisis and the intensification of this crisis. Nature-based solutions, green roofs, urban forests, wetlands, and mangroves can also reduce the heat, but absorb some of the effects of extreme weather events. Finally, and this is not specifically within this call for proposal, but it's important to make the linkages to the climate, national climate plans, what we refer to as NDCs, and also an additional framework that we call the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Here, just to give you also an overview, and again, going back to the numbers and that we need to keep in mind. And looking back in time, maybe 20 years ago, those numbers were lower, but we see an increase in terms of frequency, in terms of temperature rise, the frequency of heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and sea level rise. I will not go through the numbers one by one, but we'll share the presentation later on so we can deep dive into what each one represents and how we can tackle each aspect. Now, in terms of solutions, and I think these will be also addressed by colleagues, I've seen some solutions that also scientifically tested within cities, passive cooling and heat resistance, from green roofs to urban greening, like green corridors that dramatically reduce the temperature in cities, from flood and storm surge resilience, elevated foundations, and I believe colleagues also will just provide some examples, stormwater retention, from wind to what we call heat-proof geometry, metal straps, non-combustible cladding, and confined masonry. There are a lot of practices that's been tested on the ground, but also we will be looking at what you suggest as innovative approaches in design, but also material that is sustainable and adapted to the current situation. Again, rainwater harvesting, it's been tested in a lot of cities, not just in cities, but in rural areas. That's been effective, especially in times of droughts. Modular design, and again, going back to planning, we need to have also strengthen the capacity of city managers to be able to make long-term planning and also access to climate finance. Looking at the number of policies, I'm just limiting, this is just an initial proposal, but also limiting it to just three aspects. One is nature-based solutions, and from urban forests to tree canopy, green roofs, and what refers to also as sponge city infrastructure. All of them has been tested, and we need to move towards scaling these solutions. Important aspect in terms of policy and regulatory instruments and finance mechanisms, and very important to also you as actors, as youth. It's not just come in with solutions, but also engage with local actors, with politicians, with respective ministers, to provide the solutions, but also to be part of the discussions and the consultative process. Well, thank you, and we'll move to the next presentation.
Thank you so much, Omar, for the great presentation. And I will now pass the floor to Samar Taha, who will also speak on architecture for adaptation from another angle. Samar, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm a regional technical advisor supporting adaptation in Asia and Pacific for UNDP. And allow me first to give you a disclaimer that I'm presenting this brief from a point of view of a climate practitioner, not an architect. To give you a simplified overview of the solutions that can be considered. I cannot see the slides coming out, but I will be starting you off by acknowledging the interaction between construction sector and climate change interactions. So we all know that the building and construction sector is significantly impacted by climate change. But we also need to acknowledge that it's a big contributor to exacerbating the problem. Can we move to the second slide, please? So yeah, there's a big contribution from the sector to carbon emissions. So we're looking at a staggering 40% of the global energy-related carbon emissions coming from construction and building sector. So this makes it the second largest emitting sector after electricity generation. So while this innovation challenge is focusing on adapting our built environment and building design to the changes that are already underway, we must also think about reducing emissions. But then again, we live in a reality where we have an increase of extreme weather events by 83% in the last 2 decades. So we need to adapt to extreme shifts in temperature with all what it entails for energy demands, for shifts in precipitation patterns and erratic precipitation patterns that would cause floods and drought, sea level rise, and also cyclones. If we move to the next slide, I'm trying to define very simply the climate adaptive architecture. And in simple terms, it's an approach that designs and construct in a way that proactively respond to the current and projected local climate risks so to ensure safety, durability, and comfort. In other words, we're using material and design that can withstand climatic patterns. So if we're looking at storm resilient or resistant designs, we're focusing on reinforcing roofs, installing wind resistant windows, durable building material that can help the houses be protected from extreme events such as cyclones and hurricanes. As for the heat adaptation strategies, the focus would be on features like cool roofing material, shading elements, reflective surfaces, and natural ventilation. Natural ventilation is very important for indoor temperature to improve the comfort without relying on air conditioning. If we're looking at flood protection, then we can look at elevating homes on stilts, improving drainage systems, and design flood resilient foundation that help minimize the damage during a heavy rain. From a water conservation perspective, we need to think about installing efficient plumbing systems, rainwater harvesting, and use of gray water systems. Of course, it's important to look at green infrastructure as a very important buffer, natural buffer. So trees, vegetation, mangrove can reduce erosion, lower temperature, and reduce the velocity of water runoff that could cause flooding eventually. So in the next slide, I will go in deep to some of the design aspects. So if we can go for the previous slides. Sorry, previous slide. So the slide that I was referring to is the slide of adaptation for thermal regulation and comfort. Yes, this one. And the designer would, when thinking about thermal regulation, you need to think about the passive design orientation, aligning the homes and the buildings to maximize daylight and natural ventilation. And as we said, natural ventilation is important for reducing heat buildup. In terms of shading and use of cool surfaces and glazing, this is another important strategy to reduce heat gain in hot climates. But of course, like material plays a very big role in construction and in design, because especially in thermal regulation. So we need to think of material that absorbs and releases heat to regulate indoor temperatures. In the next slide, we're looking at some of the solutions that I found a little bit eccentric. I found it in one of the guidelines. It's not one of the ones that we piloted. But so like some of the solutions are looking at amphibious homes, and these are homes that are designed to float when water levels rises high, allowing the structure to safely move with the floodplains. And so another design would be floating houses or PACA design, which uses reinforced concrete foundations with air pockets like a honeycomb that enables the water to go in without affecting the foundation. And this is very helpful in river floodplains and flood-prone areas. Amphibious container homes is another design that can be considered. It's affordable homes that are used from repurposed shipping containers that hovers 2.5 meters using buoyant materials such as pallets and tires. Again, a very affordable material. For water efficiency, as we said, rainwater harvesting, gray water systems, and also using drought-tolerant plants for landscaping. And speaking of landscaping, in the next slide, going to the next slide, we're looking at buildings not as individual buildings, but as the surrounding. And any designer would always think about the broader context that we're building in. So, for example, if you're building in a floodplain or in a steep hillside, you need to really think about the considerations that you need to take into account. Here, nature-based solution plays a very big role in mitigating the risks that from the surrounding environment and reducing the vulnerability. So, for example, just for the sake of time, I'm just going to take the example of sponge cities, which can take a number of nature-based solutions, put it in place to capture, collect, and reuse stormwater to reduce the risk of flooding in rainy season times, while improving the water availability during the dry months. So you store it until you need it in the dry months. Now, I will move to two examples from UNDP's portfolio that we have incorporated in a couple of our projects. The next slide shows the first example, which is featured in guarantee in UNDP's AFSIA project. And this is an EU AF funded project aiming to foster innovation in climate adaptation. So this guarantee was for a Nubian vault, and this is a traditional construction technique that they use in Nubian vaults, dating back to 3,000 years or more, which enables to build solid vaulted roofs without having to use timber, concrete, or sheet metal or any other material. So the construction involves abundant local material to make mud bricks, basically, which allows the passive thermal insulation. And thinking about these techniques, these are durable techniques if you keep it maintained properly. It provides thermal and acoustic insulation and comfort. It's cost effective and the material is readily available in the environment. It's cheap material, but it's labor intensive. So all of this makes it an easy to duplicate and to scale up. And these are things that you need to think about in your solution, the scalability of the solutions and the commercializing of this. For the second example, we're looking at an example from Vietnam. If we move to the next slide. It's a GCF funded project called Improving Resilience of Vulnerable Coastal Communities in Vietnam. And in this project, we looked at two aspects. One aspect is the design and construction of flood and storm resilient homes. And from the other side, we looked at the nature-based solution that would reduce the vulnerability to storms in the coastal areas of the project. So we started by rehabilitating mangroves. And so the key design elements for these homes that we targeted, and you're looking at 4,000 new houses that was built or even more, we incorporated elevated foundation. So you're elevated on 1.5 meter above the historic flood levels. So this would reduce the damage from storms. Then reinforcing the structure from roofs, walls, windows, all of these are using durable material that would resist typhoon winds. And so we used reinforced concrete for this. Also, one of the traditional aspects of design is to have a mezzanine or a second floor where we have an elevated platform that families store all of their belongings and assets safely away from any flood water coming in. And of course, like you keep the design simple and cost effective to ensure replicability and scalability. And one of the achievements of this project is that the government of Vietnam has adopted the design features as part of their building codes. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope that these kind of solutions has inspired you to think about climate adaptive architecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Omar and Samar, for the insightful presentations. And it was really interesting to see both the broader perspective on how cities and the built environment are central to the climate adaptation, as well as the practical design solutions that can help communities respond to climate risks. Before moving forward, just a quick recap for those who may have joined us a little later. Today's webinar focuses on the new thematic areas of the Youth4Climate Call for Solutions 2026. There are 3, and we are reintroducing another one. In this first part of the session, we are exploring architecture for adaptation, and we will also look at sustainable fashion and textiles before moving to a Q&A session focused on the thematic areas presented today. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat, focus on the thematic areas, and our team will collect them. In the second half of the webinar, my colleague Lydia will guide us through 2 additional thematic areas, so oceans and blue economy, and reintroducing climate peace and security. And with that, we now move to another excited thematic area of the Call for Solutions. It is my pleasure to pass the floor to Alana Cragen. Alana, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Great. So, as you will know, the size of the fashion and textile industry is significant. It is a $1 trillion industry that employs an estimated 300 million people along the value chain worldwide, and many of whom are women. And it also contributes up to 10% of global GHG emissions and consumes over 90 trillion litres of water per year. You can pass to the first slide already. Thank you. So ensuring greater sustainability, greater circularity, and greater inclusivity with a focus on those most marginalized and vulnerable, who are often the engines of this industry, we can help tackle the triple planetary crisis of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and waste and pollution. Through this approach, alternative consumption and production pathways and new people and environment-centered business models can be fostered, and we can make significant gains across the SDGs. And this can look like from upskilling and the creation of green jobs to better working conditions and healthcare. With greater consumer awareness on sustainable practices, we are witnessing increased demand for greater transparency and accountability. And this often leads to evolving regulations and increased environmental, social, and governance standards. However, what we're seeing is as the industry slowly shifts towards this greater sustainability, many developing countries in particular will be unequipped with the necessary skills, technologies, and infrastructure to compete. So there is this risk that developing countries and communities may be left behind. Therefore, interventions along the value chain must consider all the potential impacts, so both negative and positive, and ensure that the solutions are holistic and that they take into account the environmental, social, and climate impacts along the way. Next slide, please. So as we slowly edge our way towards a more kind of sustainable, inclusive, and ethical industry, we must consider how changes will affect the different parts of the value chain to avoid any inadvertent negative impacts. So, for example, increased regulations and standards can mean that existing partners may need time and support to improve their systems. So this could look like farmers and herders may need technical assistance to show evidence of sustainable sourcing practices. So they may need support with traceability technology, or they may need support with capacity building for new practices. So for example, transitioning to regenerative agriculture for organic cotton production. And many, almost all of them would need support to access finance to help them through this transition period. So this slide here only shows the value chain, but of course, elements like design, waste and pollution, these all cut across the entire value chain and extend to consumer and post-consumer points also. Next slide, please. So how is UNDP supporting developing countries in this transition? We're doing this through a number of means. The first is policy support to help ensure that key aspects of circularity and sustainability are included in sectoral planning. So, for example, as Omar mentioned, through the nationally determined contributions. We also provide technical support through projects, programs, and accelerator labs and target specific interventions at certain points in the value chain, as well as support with value chain analyses. We also support through facilitating access to finance for more sustainable investments. And finally, through building inclusive processes, so really helping ensure that Indigenous and traditional practices are fostered and amplified, of course, with their free, informed and prior consent. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of UNDP projects. And these range from providing support to Indigenous communities and promoting the use of natural dyes in the likes of Indonesia, providing support to herder communities and promoting the sustainable sourcing of cashmere in Mongolia, all the way to upskilling in sustainable design and strengthening gender equality in Paraguay. Next slide, please. And here in Timor-Leste, the focus is really on strengthening traditional livelihoods. So, for example, the practice of weaving and preserving this cultural heritage in the textile industry. And in Vietnam, we also support the elimination of harmful chemicals in industrial sectors, including that of textiles. So this is just a very high-level overview of some of the projects and countries that we support in this sector. Next slide, please. So, as you know, as part of this call for solutions, it encourages innovation in community-based production, including the revitalization and sovereignty of traditional and Indigenous textile practices. So this will hopefully allow applicants to really reimagine how fashion is designed, how fashion is produced, how it's valued, and how it's cared for. And with this in mind, I wanted to share two companies that have some of these core principles at heart, all the while trying to support resilient and decent traditional livelihoods and, of course, more responsible consumption patterns. So, disclaimer, this is not an endorsement of these companies, but just some examples to provide inspiration should you need it when you're submitting your solution. So at Zazie, a woman-founded company, their pieces emerge from purposeful partnerships that involve more than 1,100 artisans spanning the globe. So they really try to fuse time-honored traditional techniques with modern concepts. And this results in garments that reflect the very rich tapestry of cultures, of landscapes, and narratives that their artisans hold dear. Zazie also embodies the essence of genuine collaboration and co-creation. So they really aim to foster an environment where business growth flourishes as well as harmony with the local environment, with ecosystems, with the seasons, and of course with the remarkable individuals who craft all of their products. The second example is Christy Dawn. So their initiative, Farm to Closet, is an invitation to wear your values. So here, each purchase helps replenish even more soil and sequester even more carbon, rather than depleting the soil and releasing more emissions. This initiative has nourished 219 acres of land where their cotton is farmed. They use vegetable dyes. They use block printed fabrics using centuries old methods, all in harmony with nature. And by replenishing the soil, they have observed that organisms, insects, animals, all of this rich biodiversity has returned to what was once a chemically treated and very barren landscape. So here, indigenous practices of regenerative agriculture and traditional artistry have been combined and implemented. So this has helped yield regenerative cotton. It's drawn down millions of tons of CO2. It's strengthened biodiversity, and it's ensured that the farmers they work with can really gain financial independence. This example in particular, I find, provides a beautiful illustration of interconnectedness and how the fashion and textile industry has such an important role to play for nature, for people, and planet. So with this, I wish you all the very best with your submissions and look forward to seeing some of the inspiring solutions that you create. Thanks so much. Back to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alana. It was very interesting to hear about how transforming the fashion sector requires looking across the entire value chain, and also the indigenous and traditional knowledge elements that you brought to the presentation. Thank you so much. We have now arrived to the Q&A, to the first Q&A section. Thank you everyone for being so active in the chat. We are seeing many questions coming in. And well, let's take a look at them and pass them to the colleagues. So one of the first questions that came in was for the architecture and for adaptation presentations. So Omar and or Samar, which one you prefer? One of you prefer to answer. But the question is, would building an app that give flood alert and warning fit within this thematic area, you think? And I'll pass to you.
If I may, I would say it's a question to the innovation challenge, but I would say that this is not in the heart of adaptive architecture. It's mostly about early warning systems. So I don't know, where do you draw the line as an innovation challenge for these things? I guess the panel would be much well suited to answer this question.
Thank you, Samar. Omar, are you here with us still? Would you like to address this question too?
No, yes, I'm here. I think Samar already responded in terms of selection criteria, but we just need to make the argument how it's linked to the thematic area. Just one aspect in terms of flood reduction and disaster risk reduction. Apps are encouraged the use of AI as well. One of the advantages, I think, of youth innovation, and I think from past experiences, we look at solutions that come really we come out of school, for example, and we have this thrifty mindset. So we look at solutions viable solutions that come at very reduced cost. So if you have an idea, just put it forward and just make the argument how it is linked to the thematic area. But it's apps and AI is highly encouraged from, at least from my end. Forward.
Thank you so much. So we have one more question, and it's also for architecture for adaptation. How important is local and traditional building knowledge when designing climate adaptive architecture, and how can youth integrate that into their proposals? And for Omar and Samar as well, whoever would like to answer. Thank you.
Maybe I can go first, Omar, if I may. So I would say it's very important. Local and traditional architectural design is very important because it's usually the most cost effective, the most socially acceptable, and it really goes into the needs of the society that lives in these areas. So like I think incorporating these kind of designs is very important. I showed Nubian walls, which use these traditional designs that have been in place for many years, and it showed that it's very adaptive. It showed that the cost effectiveness part, but so the innovation part is to improve part of the mud bricks. So like the mortars in the mud bricks was improved a little bit to reduce the maintenance. So these kind of aspects that you need to look at. How are we going to improve on traditional design and traditional construction approaches? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will also ask you a question, Alana, that came for sustainable fashion textiles. So the question is, how can youth-led fashion initiatives ensure that sustainability efforts also support local communities, traditional artisans, and fair livelihoods from a youth-led fashion initiative? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's a great question. And I think here the most important thing would be to include them from the very start. So when you're looking at your solution, at the design of the solution or the different intervention points throughout the value chain, if you can identify all the relevant stakeholders that your solution would affect, and you engage them from the very start of the process to ensure that their voices are heard, that their concerns are heard, that their ideas are shared, then this will make your solution a much more robust one. And it will also help ensure the implementation of your solution as well. So if you work in close collaboration with the stakeholders, with Indigenous communities, then this will help you accelerate the implementation of your solution. And of course, one thing to mention also, when looking at Indigenous or traditional practices and methods, it's very important that these are shared with consent from the Indigenous peoples, and that they are yes, like I said, part of that process from the very start. I hope that helps answer the question. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alana, Omar, and Samar. Thank you again to the speakers and really of this and answering also these questions and for answering these questions. We are now reaching the end of this first part of the webinar. And I will now pass the microphone to my colleague Lydia Beyene, who will guide us through the second half of today's session. Lydia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lakshmin. That was quite insightful segment. Hello, everyone. My name is Lydia Beyene. I am with the Youth4Climate team. And now we'll pass to the second segment of this webinar, of the deep dive webinar session. On this second segment, we will explore two additional thematic areas. So the first one is ocean and blue economy. It's one of our new thematic areas. And then the second one is going to cover climate peace and security. We're reintroducing it here today with you. So yeah, this is exciting segment. And so first, I would like to introduce you to our first panelist for Ocean and Blue Economy. We have Dr. Madeleine Niratuza, who is the Regional Technical Specialist for Water, Ecosystem and Biodiversity at UNDP Regional Service Center for Africa. So she will share her insights on what it means what we mean by ocean and blue economy, how use-led innovation can support ocean health, sustainable livelihood, and climate resilient coastal communities. Madeleine, Dr. Madeleine, if I can see you, okay, you're here. So I will leave the floor to you. And thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lydia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be here, especially to share with you some experience on oceans and blue economy, and also to hear from you what you think about our work. So go to the second slide, please. Yeah, you may wonder why healthy oceans and blue economy matter, especially to developing world. So oceans and blue economy matter because oceans absorb 30% of carbon dioxide from human activities. Oceans are source of 50% of all this oxygen that we breathe. Oceans capture 9% of excess heat from climate change. And then blue economy is a very important sector for our development as it supports economic growth. It is important for food security. It creates a lot of jobs across the world. It regulates, it is important also for climate regulation, and again, very useful for human health. Go to the next slide. Sometimes we may ask ourselves whether ocean economy is the same thing as blue economy. Those two terms are really different. So ocean economy refers to any economic activity that takes place in the sea or the ocean and uses ocean resources without necessarily being sustainable, while blue economy is any activity that happens in the ocean or in the coastal areas or in freshwater that is done in a more sustainable way. I'll give you an example. If you do oil exploitation in the ocean, and then the activities affect biodiversity, being fish or turtles or other animals, that's not blue economy, it's ocean economy because it is not necessarily sustainable. Move to the next slide. Yes, so also it is very important to know the value of blue economy. I'm sure many of us have been working on a green economy, which refers to sustainable activities that happen on the land. So when it comes to what happens in the ocean, sometimes it's hard for us to really know the real value of what is going in there. So globally, blue economy contributes contributes 3.5 to 7% of the global GDP. It also supports 31 million jobs across the globe. That's not something small. We have many jobs in fisheries and the value chains. We have a lot of jobs in tourism and conservation of marine protected areas or coastal areas, in pollution control, in shipping that happens on the ocean, etc. Also, it is expected that the blue economy sector will produce $3 trillion US annually by 2030. And this is projected to increase over time. That's a good amount of money that is injected in countries' revenue on an annual basis, just thanks to what is happening in the oceans and coastal areas. Also, it is expected that on $1 invested in blue economy, you benefit $5. That's really 5 times benefit is something big. Go to next slide. So here I want to share the UNDP approach to oceans and blue economy. So from UNDP side, we have a lot of initiatives on ocean governance. And the approach we take is to do it through enhancing governance of large marine ecosystems. I will give you an example. In Africa, for instance, we have the Benguela Current Large Marine Ecosystem that we supported to create a secretariat for 3 countries that share it, South Africa, Angola, and Namibia. And they work together to plan for what happens in the shared ocean area, especially on how they can plan together on sustainable fisheries, or also to control illegal fishing and other illegal activities in the shared waters. So we also take continental and regional approaches where I work with the continental bodies, regional economic communities, and also national governments and communities to make sure that the necessary policies and the capacities are in place to accelerate action on ocean governance and blue economy. We also take area-based management, especially for conservation of coastal and marine protected areas. We value a lot waste management, where we control plastic and other waste that comes from land to ocean, or what happens or produced in oceans. And also we make sure that we support reducing carbon footprints, especially, for instance, in shipping activities. And also we make sure that we support the domestication of international treaties and conventions. Next slide. So what we need to understand is that supporting blue economy is not only supporting SDG 14, because whatever you do on blue economy is linked to other SDGs. For instance, if you support sustainable fisheries or tourism development or sustainable shipping, you are also supporting reduction of poverty. You are enhancing water quality. So all of the SDGs are really important when it comes to blue economy. And we expect to see young people, initiatives, businesses trying to be integrated to make sure that we address issues related to different SDGs when we tackle blue economy related matters. Go to the next slide. So why youth? We are very interested in youth, not only in this program related to climate, but also in all other work of UNDP, because we know young people globally are 50% of the population. And when it comes to those living in developing countries, we know that 90% of all of that global youth is in developing world. And we know that with education and the capacity development, young people are really drivers of innovation and technology. And young people knowledge in those areas can really help to change things positively, especially with ensuring that the knowledge we have today can be passed to the next generation, but also the innovation in technology that youth can develop can tremendously reduce the biodiversity loss, improve aquaculture, support resilience of coastal communities, help to accelerate action on renewable energy development, reduce illegal fishing, etc., and also support us to develop marine technology, including pharmaceutical products. Next. So here I try to put together some guiding questions that I thought would be very useful for you when you think about your initiatives, your contributions to make sure that we have healthy oceans and sustainable blue economy developed across our countries or our continent. So, for instance, I was wondering that since many young people are really willing to be in entrepreneurship sector, I was wondering how can blue entrepreneurship be promoted in what we do, knowing that we have now heard about different sectors of blue economy and why it matters. Also, I was thinking around which kind of tools can be developed to accelerate action to enhance the resilience of coastal and marginalized communities to climate change. And other areas of thinking are around what can be done to reduce marine pollution, biodiversity loss, and illegal fishing. And then what are the innovative tools that can help to achieve marine and coastal climate smart infrastructure, early warning systems, urban resilience, and also what can we include in our businesses or think about which kind of businesses can help our countries to accelerate action on national determined contribution to Paris Agreement. Next slide. I think okay, good. So I thought about example blue economy sectors that maybe you may be interested in. So there is renewable energy, I put fisheries, there are examples around coastal and maritime tourism, there is environmental protection, biodiversity conservation, aquaculture, sustainable shipping, etc., biotechnology development. There is a lot. And also the next slide is about more examples. Can you go to the next slide? I also provided more examples here, such as, for instance, restoration of seagrass, restoration of mangrove forests in our countries. How can we reduce plastic pollution? How can we make sure that erosion control can reduce sediments that goes to rivers, but also end up in the oceans? How can we enhance wetland restoration? How can we do coral reef protection and restoration? Then how can we make sure that, for instance, the infrastructure in coastal areas are more environmental friendly? How can we bring in cultural values? Because we know that indigenous knowledge is very important in saving our oceans. So you can look at all of this and think about which kind of initiatives, which kind of businesses that can be developed around those areas and be viable. That would be really a very good contribution to saving our oceans. Next slide. Then at UNDP, we really much value the knowledge because we know that passing knowledge not only from one generation to another, but also from one colleague to another, from one region to another is very important to improve what we do. And also learning from good practices can improve our work when it comes to blue economy and biodiversity conservation. And here I put a picture showing leaders in Africa when they were sharing the inspiration at the Africa Blue Economy Week in September last year, where in Africa, really, we have taken a continental approach when it comes to addressing issues of blue economy, where we look at the Africa Blue Economy Strategy, discuss its key priorities and who should really support its implementation, including African Union Commission itself, bringing in regional economic communities that have already developed the blue economy strategies, and then the member states of African Union, which are the governments, countries come in and say, we are committing to develop our new blue economy strategies or our policies, and these are key actions we are taking or implementing on the ground. We bring in private sector, civil society, and young people. So the last year edition was really interesting because we had a lot from the youth. And I think those who are attending this discussion from African continent, we are inviting you to join us in Angola in July, because we will have the third edition of Africa Blue Economy Week, where we'll also have a ministerial segment that will discuss priorities, but also hear from young people and different actors on the continent how we can join forces to make sure that blue economy actions in Africa are really accelerated. So you are invited. If you have questions, reach out to the team leader and myself. We can share more details about that. And here I have provided key documents that can give you more details about UNDP work when it comes to oceans and blue economy. We have here Ocean Promise. We do have a good document under this link where you can really get more details on what UNDP is offering when it comes to oceans. We also have SEEDS offer, Small Island Developing States, how UNDP is approaching addressing issues that are specific to small islands. And also, we have a global fund for coral reefs. Those who are interested in conservation of coral reefs, you can get more details under that link. And we have a good program on Ocean Innovation Challenge. And I hope some of you participated in some of its editions, because we really have a good number of young people who participated and received seed grants to expand their businesses or initiatives where you are. So, and the program continues. I hope you can also join that initiative. And by the way, in Africa, we are developing a Blue Economy Accelerator program that is continental. Those who are working with the Africa Ocean Hub, you may know that They have a platform and also a forum that is taking place in 2 weeks on 23rd and 24th. UNDP and African Union are involved. Please, if you don't know about that initiative, it would be very useful to look for it because it is a very important hub that supports the capacity of young people when it comes to blue economy in Africa. Thank you very much, Lydia. Over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Madeline. Thank you so much. That was such a comprehensive presentation, from starting by really clearly defining ocean economy and then what it means by blue economy, what is the difference, how can young people could also take part in this large economy, also sharing us multiple resources. So thank you so much, Dr. Madeline. My colleagues have already pasted all the resources you have shared. And for everybody who's here listening in, if you have any questions for Dr. Madeline, please put your questions on the Q&A, and we will collect them and answer by the end of this segment. So now, without further ado, I am happy to invite my colleagues, Sally Sweeney and also Serana Arcone, who will be presenting the climate peace and security part. On this segment, we will cover what it means, what the interrelation between climate change, the conflict dynamics, peace building, the nexus between these three will be covered, and what is the role of young people in climate peace and security nexus. So without further ado, I will give it the floor to Sally, which will be followed by Serena. Over to you, Sally.
Great. Thank you so much, Lydia, and thank you to all the Youth4Climate team. It's really great to have the opportunity to present to you all online, especially on climate peace and security, which I think is a really interesting space and emerging area of work. We're really excited as well that this is now our second year of doing the Youth4Climate proposals after a very successful first year. So really big thanks to the Youth4Climate team. Maybe I'll jump to the next slide and kickstart what climate security is, or maybe we'll go to the next one. I'm conscious of time, so with the idea of Menti, thank you. So to give a very quick overview of climate peace and security, I think at its essence, what climate peace and security looks at is how climate change interacts with fragility, conflict, social instability, and social cohesion, but also vice versa. So how climate change can be a threat multiplier and exacerbate existing tensions in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. We see this through how climate impacts such as droughts, floods, land degradation, sea level rises, just to name a few, can intensify existing social cohesion, economic and political pressures. We also see that with these pressures, it can also increase a competition over resources, displacement, fuel local tension, and specifically in these fragile and conflict-affected contexts. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that, this map I think is really great, where we see climate exposure and fragility overlapped. And, it is estimated that 3 to 4 billion people live in climate vulnerable contexts. And we can see from this map, these hotspots are Sub-Saharan Africa, Sahel, Middle East, Southeast Asia, South Asia, small island developing states. And if we overlay that with the blue there, we also see that these countries are also some of the most affected by conflict or other types of fragility. And so they're very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. They also have limited institutional capacity, weaker governance systems, high reliance on climate-sensitive livelihoods, so such as agriculture, pastoralism, different types of fisheries. So we see this interlinkage. And then if we move to the next slide where we show the displacement map, and I won't go into too much detail on this, but I think, if we look at where the hotspots were on the previous slide to this, we also see that displacement is another factor within climate peace and security, as it will increase competition over land, water. It may also cause rapid urbanization, increase social tensions, and other vulnerabilities, and especially increasing vulnerability to exploitation for youth and marginalized communities, in a range of different contexts. So with this, we then jump to how we understand climate security risk. And we'll go into this in a bit more detail, but essentially we try to say, with this background, how do we then examine in the short term, the medium term, and the long term, the impacts of climate and conflict on the broader kind of social community structure. We then try and evaluate this intersection of the climate hazards and risks on the community, country, or region security, its governance systems and structures, and their social dynamics, to then finally analyze how climate change and conflict disrupts access to natural resources and other kind of key livelihood components. So to try and understand then how climate peace and security, yep, we can jump to the next slide. Climate peace and security is being understood at the global level. Now that we've got a bit of a background of, what climate peace and security is, it's really interesting to see how this is starting to be articulated at a range of different multilateral, regional, and national forums. And the first we can reflect on is at the Security Council, where climate peace and security was first mentioned in 2007, which then also kind of facilitated the establishment of the United Nations Climate Security Mechanism, which is a joint initiative between United Nations Environment Programme, Department of Peacebuilding Operations, Department of Peacebuilding Political Affairs, and UNDP. And we collectively do a joint initiative that looks at a range of different climate peace security issues. But also to this, we also have the COP presidencies, and we saw COP27, COP28, and again 29, where climate peace and security has started increasing in its recognition. In COP27, we see it's directly discussed climate impacts in fragile and conflict-affected settings, which was then picked up again in 28, where climate relief, recovery, and peace declaration was made, to then in the COP29 in Azerbaijan, where we had the Baku Hub and the peace, the Climate Peace Academy kind of established. Looking then to a regional level, we see the African Union has started to establish a common position on climate peace and security, to then also in the Pacific, where we see the Boe Declaration on Regional Security that identifies climate change as the single greatest threat to livelihoods, security, and the well-being of the people, of the Pacific people. And then finally, we reflect on some of the kind of national policy integrations, and we see in some countries there's direct national action plans, like such in Niger. But the other interesting space where climate security has started emerging is through the nationally determined contributions, where climate security is starting to be included in these different bodies. So you can see just through that the breadth of spaces and environments that climate peace and security is starting to recover. So more importantly, we move on to then why youth matters for why youth matter for climate peace and security. And in essence, there are 700 million youth living in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and our young people are disproportionately affected by the climate impacts. And if we reflect on some of the statistics previously, if we see, the impact that climate change is going to have in the next 10 to 15 years, youth need to be at the center of the decision-making process of how, we address some of the issues around climate peace and security. We also see that youth are frequently dealing with some of the unemployment and the marginalization and exclusion from these key decision-making processes that directly or adjacently will concern them. So this being said, we can say that youth represent a powerful force for resilience and innovation. And it's really important to see how we can engage youth to strengthen inclusive governance and create some sort of longer term stability at local community levels. youth very much are the transformative agents or agents of change. And, we see this through different innovative initiatives, local community initiatives, and new approaches to cooperation and dialogue. But I think to kind of also highlight that this is, for me, a really interesting statistic is that in many program countries that we work in, 60 to 70% of the population is under the age of 30. So if you're going to design a program, you're going to design an initiative, you need to be really conscious of who, the audience are. And so that's a really kind of critical part of making sure youth are at the center of these discussions. But, as mentioned, there are some other barriers. There's higher risk exposure. But within this, there is also an untapped potential. How can we highlight that youth are problem solvers and innovators to some of these issues? And we see this already happening in these different spaces. And this is where we can jump to the, youth-led climate peace and security solutions. And this is where we kind of, I want to reflect very briefly on some of the really great initiatives that we saw in the pilot round last year. And as we went through all the great submissions that came through, it was really inspiring to see how many different approaches, different actors, different partners were brought into different proposals. And this is why I think I get quite excited about climate peace and security, is because it really does allow for you to be quite innovative in your approach. We know we're facing a really challenging environment. So how can we leverage our different communities, networks, and access to build something that brings people together? A couple of, I think, the most notable submissions we saw were ones that included faith-based organizations as being climate champions, which was really interesting. And I don't think for many of us in the climate peace security space had been something we'd seen much before. And I think the other interesting one, and I'll try and wrap up here, was the integration of kind of art-based programs as well. And I know we just heard from the sustainable fashion as well, and how these were initiatives to help kind of communicate some of the climate anxieties and conflict anxieties that communities are feeling, and how that can be a bridge for social cohesion. So I think that is a really good, well, I hope it's a good overview of climate peace and security, which leads nicely into the kind of next section when we're looking at the scope for 2026, and what are some of the areas that you can look at within your proposals, and as you can be as creative as you want. So here I will hand over to my colleague Serena to kick us off.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sally, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you online. It's a true pleasure to be here and to present. And I think after we heard from Sally about a bit what is basically like the big picture, let's say, we now can dive in a little bit more into the practical, more kind of, implication for design and intervention that is youth-led on climate peace and security and can be truly impactful. Let's kind of go back to the previous slide, please. I just want to give you somehow an overview of what are the UNDP approaches to youth-driven climate peace and security solution. Yes, previous slide. The previous one. Exactly. Thank you so much. And I think we can kind of summarize the let's say, three main approach. So I think this is important also for understanding a bit like what are the options and hopefully inspire the design of your intervention as well. And I think what UNDP does in this space is really, first of all, climate-proof, more traditional conflict prevention, peace building, and stabilization intervention. So kind of bringing the climate element into what are more traditional approach in that space. The second one, it's somehow the other way around. So this means how we can basically include the conflict sensitivity and peace positive consideration intervention that falls a bit into more traditional climate adaptation and mitigation kind of space. And the third one is basically where this kind of, dimension intersect and how we can basically do integrated programming. So this means like to leverage what is a more traditional approach, expertise, and action in a way that somehow generate the so-called the climate peace co-benefit. So basically, in a simple term, how they can basically tick two boxes in the same time. So intervention that can create benefit for both climate aspect, but also peace building and conflict prevention. Another aspect we're also extremely interested is also the cross-border dimension. So this means how we can basically tackle challenges. Apologies for some disturbance. How we can basically tackle challenges that are specific to community that are across border, are also across region or sub-region, because obviously those community face a complete different set of challenges. Next slide. I think you have an overview about this dimension already in the guidelines, but I think we can just summarize a bit more what are the sub-thematic topics that in considering your intervention you can look at. And obviously these are some of the dimension that is really related to livelihood, diversification, livelihood support, but also natural resource management or joint management of common resources and so on and so forth, but also risk anticipation. So for example, how we can focus on forecasting, on climate monitoring, but also early warning system and so on and so forth. Another aspect is prevention of violent extremism. And is including also considering those community where climate change can create risks for youth that can create some form of basis for recruitment from armed group. But also looking at mobility dimension, especially looking at climate-related displacement and related risks, but also conflict-related displacement, how this basically can be considered together. Also intervention looking at mediation and social cohesion. Another aspect that we are really extremely interested and somehow very much connect to the presentation that we heard before is also aspect related to ocean and coastal resilience. So this means the specific risk that climate change, how it affects a community in the coastal region, but also at sea, and how this may create risk from peace and stability, and which kind of solution can specifically be put in place to address a risk in this intersection. And finally, also the use of AI, data, technology. So this means how the kind of risk that some of these technology have, but also the proactive role that these tools can have in creating climate and peace outcomes. So next slide. And I think I really would like to focus on this a little bit more because I think from the experience, as Sally was mentioning before, that we had from the first round of application, we could see how this was one of the major challenges. So this really means unpacking the interlinkage, how to do that. And it's basically, first of all, we have to start by saying that risks are different in every context. So the way climate presents a risk on peace and security in one context may not necessarily be the same in another context. So I think it's extremely important that this is the starting point for us to conceptualize our intervention. And this means basically looking at the specific climate hazard. So this means like, for instance, drought, cyclone, flood, sea level rise. So this means looking at both kind of slow but also fast onset kind of events, and therefore try to understand which kind of implication, which kind of risk, or how it exacerbates existing risk or existing vulnerability in a given context. And that is where, like definitely the response of the dynamic in a certain community may be totally different for the same hazard in another community. And from there, basically try to design a response that is fit per purpose. It's contextually relevant, specific. And therefore, it's really the way where we kind of hit that sweet spot, that sweet kind of interlinkage between climate, peace, and security in the way we respond, we design our response to identify the challenges. Next slide. So starting from that, I think we can also give you some tips that hopefully will help you try to identify interventions on the ground that are impactful, that are relevant, and that can create an impact that is lasting and sustainable. And first of all, definitely the role of community is central here. It's extremely important that community are engaged, that solutions are locally driven, locally grounded, and these also mean acknowledging the role that community have in identifying their own risk and their own responses. Most of the time we see that basically community already know somehow the solution. So it's really about helping them identify them for themselves, but also trying to incorporate some of the local practices, local knowledge that the community already have. This is the way like where basically we ensure local ownership, but the local ownership is also helping in creating that sustainability, in creating that the intervention is not only accepted but can really generate an impact that is bigger than the intervention itself. And another important aspect is also in considering the intervention catalytic, in the sense that we act small, but we think bigger than what it is. So this means to create an intervention that somehow can be scaled up, can be generating a positive kind of impact. And this also, obviously, it's something that we like to think when we design the intervention on the ground. Inclusion is also an extremely important aspect. And inclusion also means to be aware of what is the local power dynamic of the intervention where we are trying to implement our action. And this is extremely important because a different kind of power dynamics are very different in different contexts, and therefore leverage some of these, the role that some local representative, local institution, local leaders as well may have is really a way that can be instrumental in generating impact. And Sally, I think, was mentioning the role of faith-based organization. This is just a wonderful, like a simple example of how this can be done, how this can be leveraged. And then it's also important to be realistic and to be extremely focused. Obviously, when we speak about security and peace and climate impact, is something that somehow our brain go always big and but in reality, these issues are extremely localized. So keeping our intervention focused on a specific output, on a specific outcome, and then a very specific challenge and community, it really helps creating a response that is feasible, but also creating an impact in the longer term. Something that we also encourage pretty much is geographic representation. Obviously, we would like to see how different solutions can be implemented across a variety of contexts. And finally, this is something that probably you have heard a lot, but I mean, I won't be tired to repeat again. And this is basically innovate, innovate, innovate. Think outside the box. This is really like the value addition that this community have. And this is really the way we have seen so much impact can be generated even with the small things. And when we think about innovation, we don't have to think about necessarily technology or, like this kind of, big impact. Innovation can take many forms. It can take the form of a new partnership. It can take the form of introduction of a process, something that was not there before. So I think when we think about innovation, it's important that we think outside the box. And we like this is really like the value addition that we can generate through this intervention. And then going to the last slide, I think we also included a collection of some useful resources. I believe some of these may be already shared with you. We are also happy to share with the Youth4Climate team so that they will be available and accessible to you, but hopefully they can also be useful references for in supporting your application, the design of your intervention. And I will stop here and over to you.
Thank you so much, both of you, both Sally and Serena. This was such a very clear presentation, and I am sure most of our participants here have a better understanding of the nexus between climate peace and security. And also, when you first begin, like you said, young people are affected by the climate risks, but at the same time, they're also transformative agents and also solution holders and innovators. So this is quite a good takeaway for all of us. And there was a lot of questions here in the Q&A and in the chat, but I will select a few questions here, but for the participants here, I would also encourage them to go to the call for solution guidelines and read some of the specific areas we already put on the call for solution, and also the presentations they just shared answered most of the questions which were asked a bit before. So that's really nice. And please know that we will share both the recording and the presentations on the Youth4Climate platform on the deep dive webinar page. So you can always go back and refer before the call for solution closes. So thank you again, colleagues. This was such an interesting presentation. Thank you. So let me start with the question from the ocean and blue economy, and then I will come back to the CPS part. Madeline, are you with us? Yes, I see you, Madeline. So we have selected like 3 questions for you. I put them here. So one participant was very much interested in working on plastic pollution in coastal communities. So does she have like do you have any recommendations for you for the person who's asking this on how to pursue this type of work? That's the first question. And there is a second one, which was overwhelmingly being posted on the chat. So a lot of people were asking if you could tell us a little bit more about the event in Angola, and if you could say a little bit about that. And I will come back with the third question, maybe after the CPS question. Over to you, Madeline.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lydia. And thank you, participants, for the very good questions. The question on plastic, yes, UNDP is very committed to really reducing plastic pollution. And I will address it in connection with another question I saw under the chat box where someone was saying he's working on, I think, Niger River Basin, in Niger River Basin on something, I can't remember what. And he was asking whether what is happening in fresh water and on land is connected to what is happening in the ocean. And I'm saying yes, that it is really very important to link what happens on land and the impact that it puts on oceans. And I would introduce maybe something they can look for, what it means and how it is applied, what we call source to sea approach. It means where we have sources of water, that's where pollution starts. People can put water bottles, plastic bags, whatever, in rivers, or when the rain comes, it can wash all of those plastic waste into water bodies and they end up in the ocean. So that's all connected. We need to reduce pollution at the source to make sure that our oceans are healthy and clean. And yes, the work on plastic reduction in the coastal areas is a very good one. So I think as I said, integration is very important. And I think Lydia and your colleagues under Youth4Climate initiative, you are giving them guidance on how the initiatives should really contribute to a good number of SDGs, not only one SDG. So that's why it is very important to look at integration. So if you reduce pollution in the coastal areas, how does it benefit the communities around your project? And how does it bring a positive impact on biodiversity in the coastal areas, but also in the ocean? Thank you. And the second question is how young people can join the 3rd edition of Africa Blue Economy Week in Angola. Once we put out the save the date, I will share it with Lydia, and then she can share with everyone who attended this webinar. I think that would be the easier way of doing it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Madeline. Maybe this is connected, so let me finish here, and I will go to the climate peace and security. So we also have other questions regarding if fresh waters such as lake and rivers are also considered as blue economy.
Yes, especially in the case of Africa, you need to look at your context. Maybe in Asia Pacific or in Latin America and the Caribbeans, the way they define blue economy might be different from Africa. But in Africa, for instance, when you look at the Africa Blue Economy Strategy, it includes what happens in freshwater, in the rivers and lakes, and what happens in oceans. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Madeline. So, if you have more questions, please put them in the Q&A and on the chat. Even though we finish the webinar, we collect the questions and put them on our FAQ page on the Youth4Climate platform. So, yeah, if you have more questions, please keep them posted there. Now, moving to the climate peace and security. There is multiple questions, but I'm going to pick a few of them and ask now. So the first question was like, what is one key element applicants should consider when designing a project that addresses both climate risks and peace building at community level? And then maybe I will go to the second question after this.
Maybe I can jump in here, and Serena, please jump in for what I've missed. I think some of the things that could, when looking at the community level, so to understand the question from the climate and conflict side, the key elements. I think firstly it's to really understand what are the kind of key livelihoods that those communities are reliant on. What are the social kind of dynamics within that community. So, who's living there? What are the demographics? What is the makeup in that community? What is the sources of income? What are the climate shocks that they are feeling, could feel? And then seeing where there's a kind of intersection between the two. And I think that once you start actually exploring these different spaces and trying to understand, especially from a peace building lens, where did a conflict begin? How, what is understood as its central driver? And then the more you explore these different components, you start to see that there's actually a linkage to these, or an overlap of some of these issues. So I hope that's a helpful response, but Serena, please feel free to jump in.
I'm happy also to compliment. I think Sally was giving a very good overview, but I think Lydia, just to respond to this question, is going back a little bit to what one of the slides was basically showing, and is really about trying to understand the context first. So this means basically how different kind of dimension intersect, and how climate act as a way of, exacerbating or interacting with different kind of vulnerability, different kind of risks, but also how in certain kind of dynamics, in certain kind of context, conflict can prevent climate action, and therefore even indirectly exacerbating a certain kind of risks. So probably understanding the issue is really the first step, because it's the only way for designing a response that is fit for purpose and is also locally relevant. So I hope this really helped.
Thank you both so much. So there was one more question regarding a specific area. So they asked if climate and water security fall under climate peace and security domain.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I saw that, and I think it's a really important question, and again, complements maybe the previous speaker as well, but definitely, and I think water is a common, a trend that comes out of a lot of climate peace and security programming. Even if it's not related to water, and water is not part of the programming, you'll find that water somehow creeps in. So I think we all know how important water is in all different contexts. So absolutely, it's definitely an important issue for us.
Okay, thank you both so much. Thank you, thank you everyone. This was such a very insightful session, honestly. And thank you for preparing, for coming in and staying with us for 2 hours. This is very much appreciated. Yeah, we have collected all the questions, like I mentioned before, and any questions that we cannot cover right now, will be posted on the FAQ page. My colleagues will paste the FAQ page for you so you can go and refer to them. And we also have one more deep dive webinar coming up on Thursday, which will cover inclusion in climate action. So we'll cover gender equality and also Indigenous peoples inclusion and Indigenous knowledge. So make sure that you are registered and attend. And I hope we will see everybody on Thursday. So maybe before I go, just to give you some additional points on what kind of resources exist for for applicants. First of all, the call for solution guidelines. Please make sure to refer to that as your main guiding document. Second, the FAQ page for any questions you have. If your answers are not covered there, you can put your questions on the comment section. You could also keep an eye on the Youth4Climate Call for Solution page for the upcoming one-to-one mentorship program, which will be delivered by online volunteers. And we also will share one more learning opportunity, which is the Climate Catalyst Mentorship Program, which is delivered in partnership with UNFCCC's Youth for Capacity program. We will have a project design boot camp, so make sure you registered and you have started the onboarding process. So yeah, this is from us for now. I would like to say thank you for everyone here and have a wonderful rest of day or evening, depending on where you are. So yeah, thank you everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
Lydia.
Dr.
Thank you.
Martin.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining.